You are listening to the Partner Up podcast by Welcome to Bundaberg. I'm Gail Reynolds, and in this series you will hear from community leaders who are kicking big collaborative working together goals. We will highlight the successful partnerships, shedding light on the positive impact they have had on both businesses and the community. Welcome to Bundaberg aims to improve the health and well-being, work and lifestyle outcomes for people living in Bundaberg by activating and implementing a range of community-led strategies across a range of services for a more connected, cohesive community. Let's go. Before we start today's episode, I would like to acknowledge country. I would like us to take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place and connection. In the spirit of reconciliation, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we live, work and love on. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging of all the lands, and I extend that respect to all First Nations peoples listening today. Thank you for joining us today. We are speaking with a very special guest on our series Community Centred Solution. My name's Gail Reynolds, and today I have with me Dr. Cath Cosgrave from the Attract, Connect, Stay and many other things within community work. I would not be able to do an introduction justice, so I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Cath, because I think you will be able to do a better job of it than I. So please tell everyone what we need to know.
Great. Okay. Hi, Gail, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Gail says, I'm Dr. Cath Cosgrave, and for the last sort of 10 plus years, I've been looking at what it is that impacts attraction and retention of skilled workers and professionals to rural and regional areas. That was my PhD study. So that study was about looking at community mental health professionals in rural and remote places in northwestern New South Wales. And it was a sort of a whole of person approach. So I was interested, it was very under-researched at the time. And I was really interested in what brought people to a place and what drove them out of a place. So while it was meant to be a good news story, it was meant to be why people stayed, it actually was a thesis on why people left. So subsequently to that I've worked on translating that knowledge into how it could be practical for rural businesses and organisations who are missing important skilled workers that impact the services that rural communities need and want. That's primarily been in healthcare, but we know the model fits in all for all skilled workers and professionals, and has been operating in Shepparton since 2021, looking and working for to attract and retain skilled workers in all professions: engineering, agriculture, and healthcare. So healthcare is generally, if we can get it to work for healthcare, we can get it to work for most other sectors as well. And healthcare is usually the largest employer in a rural community. Then next, usually council, and that has specific shortages of skilled workers as well. So we've been focusing on those.
Thank you. I started following your work quite a number of years ago now when I was writing my own thesis project and I was citing your work in my project. So unbeknownst to me that one day I would actually be talking with you and speaking and learning so much at a whole different level. So it's quite a bit of a fangirl moment when you start, really meeting and interacting with those people who you were so invested in the writing and the work. So that's a really cool moment for me when I first got to meet you a little while ago, and the work that the reason I was drawn to that work was because it was such a space of where I saw such need, particularly in our community in Bundaberg. And I really liked the approach that you were taking in the work that you were doing. So I really want to hit you with some questions today about, the work that you're doing and how you're helping regional, rural, remote communities with their workforce strategy and their shortages. So I'd really like to get you to tell us some stories from your journey, because it's been so diverse. And what is it that you believe a community-led approach, and why is that key to solving some of these workforce challenges, particularly in places like Bundaberg?
Okay, so let's go back to the PhD studies. So 10 plus years ago, the focus was generally on the professional factors or the workplace factors that were influencing recruitment and retention. And there was this sort of basket of personal factors, that partner employment, we kind of knew that was important, and childcare and all the things, and the type of place it was. But it was very under-researched, and it was very messy. It was just like, here's a bag of things that you'll need to think about, but there was no structured way to think about those things. So the study that I did, my PhD study, was very deliberately focused on all factors. We wanted to know everything about what it was that it was influencing people's decision to stay. And not surprisingly, there was quite a different experience between locals who were employed in skilled professional jobs and newcomers who were in the main what health services were trying to recruit. And that's pretty common in all, we need these skilled workers that are usually trained outside our regions. We need to be able to attract them. And I think that will be ongoing. Even if we have a grow your own strategy, we'll still need to be attracting skilled workers to our places. So this very broad lens was a grounded theory study. So the most famous grounded theorist out there is Brene Brown, and I'm that type of researcher. So I theorize on what the data is telling us. And then I very deliberately always wanted to make a difference. So translate that research into very practical steps, which is possibly why you're enjoying my papers, because they were particularly written for practitioners, business owners, line managers, etc., on really addressing their current problems, both to attract and retain workers. So getting back to these non-local newcomers, so when I was interviewing for my PhD, locals wouldn't talk about the social or the personal. It just kind of, unless they were prompted to, they're always focused on the organisational and the role factors. But interestingly, newcomers nearly always spoke about the personal first, what was happening for them socially. And in the main, most spoke about a period in the first 12 months of quite significant loneliness and alienation, and that they would tend to spend most of their weekends by themselves. Some were making friends in the workplace, but there was a risk there that if one left, they all left. So these social determinants looked actually and appeared really strongly, and they were really under-researched. So that's what I've spent the last 10 years looking at. What are these social determinants, and what is the role of community to support businesses to attract and retain staff? So there's quite a lot of work for us to do there as communities. And why are we best placed to do that work? No one knows your community better than key stakeholders and people that live there. So you'd really want representation from council, key rural businesses, and other key rural leaders that are either retired or just have a real passion. So we often attract people from business chambers, etc., to develop strategies that are evidence-informed, so informed by what we know from this 10 years of research that works and from other places across the globe, as well as really making it practical and useful for what's your strengths. What is it that's unique about Bundaberg? What's great about Bundaberg? Why would you want to live here? at the same time really owning where the challenges are. So nearly all rural communities have significant challenges. Some of the usual things are around childcare, appropriate housing for workers, high school education for families relocating, and a whole lot of meaningful partner employment. And those things need a more systemic approach. They really need a whole of community approach to address those issues. You can't, as an organisation, do those things alone. So this research that I've been doing really identifies that there's a role for organisations to attract ideal candidates, recruit best fit candidates, both for the organisation, team and community, and onboard them well. But there's also these community responsibilities around making sure we onboard and support newcomers. And we think of, in this case, we always think about the whole family. In fact, we're often more interested in the partner, if there is one, because we know that their personal satisfaction is absolutely key to the choice to stay. And then some of the stay factors, so they tend to focus around the professional factors and having meaningful careers in place. And that again means that organisations in a sector will need to work together to see if they can develop meaningful career pathways in place. And in terms of community, it's this coming together. I was just looking at a case study that writing a case study this morning for a course that I'm writing at the moment, based on something Shepparton did, which was a housing audit to check what it was that newcomers were really wanting, and they wanted more infill housing, urban based in the town, not suburban. And that was a really key finding. And so that was then delivered to council and other key stakeholders around what housing needs were what they were and what needed to be done about them. And another thing in Shepparton that they did, another case study I was writing, was they recognised that they had a whole lot of partners that were of professionals that they were attracting to Shepparton, who were migrant engineers with unrecognised skills in Australia, and most of them were driving Ubers or in work that was not using their current skill set. So the Community Connector, in partnership with La Trobe University, this Greater Shepparton Council, and the Committee for Greater Shepparton, all sort of like that, and that one's like a business chamber, work together to develop a program, match these migrants with local engineering companies and businesses, as well as a process to get their skills recognised in Australia. So that's the sort of value add that a community connector, so we'll get to what a community connector program is, but these are the sorts of things that can both provide tailored support for the individuals, and that's really important, plus address some of these systemic or community level issues. So it's a key strategy for addressing what we know are the known problems, and that a line manager alone or a business owner can't address these issues, nor do they have the time. So we need to, who needs to do what, but as a whole community, we need to be doing a lot of things to improve attraction and retention of skilled workers.
There's so many levels that come into really helping and listening to these newly arrived people, and to work out what their needs are, and how can we help them settle and hold on to them for as long as we can. And you've seen that firsthand in your research, and then now you're running, multiple pilots all around Australia, and we're lucky enough to kick off one here in Bundaberg, and we're going through that establishment phase at the moment. In your experience, how does listening and welcoming newly arrived people and professionals How does it shift the dynamics of retention in communities like Bundaberg?
Okay. So if you don't do it, if you don't provide this person-centered, so really tailored for the individual and their family, if they have one, what you have is this almost inevitably this period of alienation, and that they don't have the sense of belonging that they need to feel that they could commit to staying. Now, if that work hasn't, some people can do this on their own, but many can't. Or it takes too long. Your study found that if those initial settlement needs really needed to be addressed in the first 3 months of arrival: housing, schooling, partner employment, and the beginnings of social connection. And if those things were not in place, the seeds of turnover intention, either from the partner or the worker, would begin. And we know from the research that once those have begun, they're very likely to germinate, and they're hard to pull out once they're there. It gathers a momentum. So by listening and tailoring our interventions and support for each particular family, but we know many common things that everybody experiences. So housing, partner employment, or education, if that's wanted. The needs for preschoolers, the needs for primary schoolers, and the needs for high school children. Connecting with a GP, a hairdresser, a vet, all the things. Whatever is needed, those things need to be done as soon as possible. And particularly some of the strongest evidence has been from people who have been involved in our Community Connector program, where they've done other moves without such support, and they're absolutely bowled over by how loved up they are. And we really want them to be welcomed, to feel invited, and that they're being well supported in their organisation, but they're also being well supported to settle into the community. And after that initial settlement, we then focus on very much on those social connections, led by what the interests of the worker and or their partner are. Whatever those interests are, we try and match those, make introductions, and absolutely make sure that people don't turn up to, let's say, a reading group and are not warmly welcomed. So that the Community Connector's role is often to lay out, to make connections with all the services and all the groups that exist, to make sure that when someone arrives, that they're warmly welcomed. And we know that this sort of avoids these seeds of turnover intention and makes people, usually we can make them feel quite local within 12 months. And that's absolutely essential to do for that decision to stay, because a key finding from the PhD study was, whilst people were initially focused on the professional and the role and settling into the job, whether they were newcomers or not, after 12 months, it was about how well they felt, that it was about those social determinants, how well they felt the town was meeting their needs, and whether they had made friends. It's a human need to belong. And we can't do without that for the long term. There's a little bit of protection by having a partner that comes with you. But in the end, people need a peer group and social connection to stay. So a town needs to warmly welcome and include their newcomer workers. So we've found from the research that towns, communities are we're welcoming, but we're not necessarily inclusive. My partner calls it this, we're sort of, you get stuck in your lasagna layer and you don't see these newcomers, you don't know they're here. And most rural people who live in rural communities are kind of appalled when I tell them this, that we're not warm and welcoming, because we think we are, but we're not doing it to the full extent. I think so sometimes I get questions like, oh, but we do this for the doctor, and we've always tend to have done it for a newly arriving GP and their partner. But we need to be doing this systemically. We need to be doing it for all new arrivals and not privileging one type of employee. They're all vital to providing services for our rural communities. So it's so we need it to be tailored and broadly across all sectors. And I think probably I'll just speak when it comes to migrant. So if we're attracting migrants to Australia, to your town to work, we know that that's 3 times more work in that initial settlement phase to make sure they can often arrive without a driver's license, without a bank account. Sometimes the partner is not speaking English, so we have to look for special types of employment that would suit that skill set, and doing all the things we need to do to make sure that they have an easier settling in place and preparing them for some of the challenges well before they arrive. So this is all the roles of the community connectors. They need to be flexible, person-centered, warm and lovely, but also really strategic. So when they're seeing these ongoing problems like gaps in childcare, which is a very common one, which is preventing the partner from going to work although they want to, or other things that are causing stress on the family, to work with the key players and stakeholders that are responsible for childcare. And I've seen some lovely solutions in Broken Hill, a client I work with. Childcare was such an issue in that town that she was the CEO of an allied health and NDIS service and a medical practice. And so they set up their own childcare service for their staff. And she felt that was a better investment than squandering money on seek ads that wouldn't attract the right people nor keep them. So you need to think outside the box. Communities need to be really innovative. There's lots of strategies we can talk to you about the innovation that has been going on worldwide. But these are the sorts of things we need to do to attract these skilled workers and keep them. So
I'm sure you can share many moments, many stories of transformative outcomes where you've witnessed when they fully embrace the Community Connector program and the model. And I know you've got plenty of stories that you can tell of the other sites that are existing and what they're doing. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Probably the first one I want to share is Dr. Hayder and his partner Iman, who was a pharmacist. So this model, the Community Connector program, is one of 5 pillars that I say that you need to attract and retain a skilled workforce. You need to be doing, and the Community Connector program is the strategy for settling and connecting people into the community. So it's the 4th of 5 pillars. And so I found this model from a Churchill Fellowship I did that went to Canada, to specific strategies, successful strategies that had been around the support and social connection of newcomer workers to rural places. And in a small community in Marathon, Ontario, I found this model. And the model we now call the Community Connector program, of which we were talking, there are many sites across Australia now. And that model was then funded by the Foundation for Rural and Regional Renewal to pilot in Australia, and Glen was the pilot site. And so when I spoke to that community, so we brought together a collaboration of council. Initially was the initial contact, economic development officer in that council really saw the potential for it. So did the mayor. And we came together and brought a community collaboration to build the Community Connector program, led and managed and funded by the community. But they spoke about what the community, and we did a number of co-design workshops with community. Their key problem was lack of GP workforce in the community. And there were large numbers, like over 700 of the community. It's a town of about 6,500, had no GP. And people were beginning to leave because of this lack of a GP. And just where they were in terms of the GP practices, we're seeing a lot of it happen across Australia now. But, GPs were heading towards retirement age. And so they were looking at some of these GP practices closing. So there weren't a lot of them. So it was the number one thing they wanted. So with a lot of work, they found Dr. Hayder and his wife, and how they found them was his wife was a pharmacist doing a locum role in Glen, and the community connector got talking to the locum, and she said, "Oh, well, I have a partner who's he was doing his GP training, so it would because he was an overseas doctor. They were both originally from Iraq, but living in Brisbane, that he would need to do GP supervision. In partnership with the medical clinic that eventually employed Hayder, they worked on with the relevant authorities around what was needed, what supervision he would need, and helped him jump through all the hurdles. That brought a GP to the town, and the retiring GP was able to provide the necessary supervision. So they got a 2-for-1, as I like to think. They got a pharmacist and a GP, both very urgently needed. And I suppose the other lovely warm bit about this was they had Iman and Dr. Hayder have a child with special needs, and that required specific sorts of housing as well as some nannying support. Now, the specific housing, the Community Connector found that housing. It was not on the market. They found it through, I think it was some farmers offered this place. But there was delays in Dr. Hayder and his family getting there. So council stood up to pay for the rent for a few months to make sure that housing was secured. And then locally, the Community Connector was involved in identifying and recruiting nannies to support with the childcare, the needs of their child with special care needs. Also making sure that their school-age daughter was enrolled in horse riding, because that was her key thing. So that's a real example of all the things, whatever it is, the Community Connector is involved in doing, but how whole of community it needs to be. So I really believe all we've got to do is ask, and make sure the ask is very specific. And there are good-willed people all throughout our communities who are really willing to help. And that's a classic example. So that we've got calculations of just how many people that bought onto the GP books locally, and has made a really significant difference. And they're a family that have adapted really well to the community. Do you want me to give you more? So that's one. And so most recently, we've got Southern Grampians. So that's a very specific Community Connector program. That Southern Grampians is in Victoria. And we have the major employer in town is running the program. So it's not yet a community collaboration, but that's Western District Health Service. They had significant nursing shortages, really significant nursing shortages, as well as allied health. Allied health, as you know, in Bundaberg, there's a lot of stubborn to recruit positions. They're very difficult to recruit a mid-career or senior allied health professional. And so that program has now been running about 14 months, and Carly, the Community Connector there, has recruited 31 new arrivals, and 19 of those were international. So remember, I said 3 times the amount of work. And they were all arriving with it, they needed to be picked up from the airport. Well, Tullamarine and Hamilton are, I think, about 4.5 hours drive for each other. Licenses, bank deposits, making sure the supermarket shop was done, and all the things just to make sure those initial few days were good. And so that has made an amazing difference to their aged care services in particular, and areas of significant shortage in the hospital. So another case of doing all the things, supporting them, and the HR manager who we work directly with for Western District Health Service has described the Community Connector program as revolutionary, that it has made these are sort of things we know need to be done, but can't really be done well by a line manager off the side of their desk. They're too big an issue, and frequently line managers will talk about all the challenges they're hearing. They're doing the right things. They're doing regular supervision and chatting with newcomer employees, but and they're concerned when they hear about a partner being lonely or dislocated, but they don't have the capacity or time to be able to put in strategies. So this is really what the Community Connected's done. I sometimes think it's, 50 years ago, women always did this kind of work in rural communities, but now we're all at work too. We've needed to find a way to be that warm, lovely, welcoming part of a rural community, but do it more systemically, do it so that there's no one that gets forgotten, everybody's included. And because of it's research evidence-based, we can chart, we know exactly what's going to happen to people over time. And there are key points that we like our community connectors to check in with how things are going in terms of, to avoid this seeds of turnover thing. Let's intervene as quickly as we can to make sure that difficult things don't happen, because as I said, once they start to happen, people develop a story for why they're going to go, and it's very hard. I've never actually seen it successfully pulled back from that. Once people have begun to think this place isn't for me or our family, our needs are not being met, they will go.
I hear stories every day when I'm talking to businesses or organisations in Bundaberg where they're struggling to recruit, and then they recruit, but they struggle to retain. And it essentially comes down to those things that you've spoken about. It's that welcoming community culture, that whole family approach, looking after everyone who is newly arrived, and also that social connection, making sure that they are connected and they feel supported and belong. And I think that's the thing why I really resonate with the research and the evidence. And it's really nice to know that, those values are actually mean something. It's not just us talking fluff about what we would like to see, but there's this research has been going on for decades. And particularly for you in this area, we've got the proof that this is how it works, and this is why it works. What are those real key values, I suppose, about creating a community that can truly support these newly arrived professionals? What do we need to do?
Okay, so we absolutely need to be person-centered, and be guided by all the things. So I think we could have lenses on, like I'm your manager, so I don't ask personal things. There's ways of asking those personal things without being intrusive, but we need to care about the whole individual and their family unit. So and I think I know that managers feel with the Community Connector program less fearful of asking, because they know that it then won't be their responsibility to act on what some of those challenges might be. So definitely we need to be person-centered, and we need to be place-based. So place-based, frequently being bandied around. What I mean by that is that we have an assets-based approach to our community development. So this is the Community Connector program is absolutely a community development initiative. And I suppose what I didn't mention is prior to becoming an academic, I worked in international and Australian community development on projects strengthening health services in rural places, both overseas and in Australia. So often I think the community development program is teaching community development. And so I call it assets-based community development. It's a well-researched strategy and what it really is saying is, let's focus on our strengths. Let's start where we are and what we can do together. So really identifying what is fabulous about Bundaberg, where are the really strong organisations and rural leaders, and starting there, working with those people, because it's always relational, it's always about the people, and building from there. So that could be doing less. So some community connector programs do work in the attract recruit space. Some just work on the settle connect strategies. So you may choose to do less, but do it well. So some sites have started in just healthcare because that's the biggest, or they've immediately gone to all industries. Most end up looking after all skilled workers and professionals because they're doing partner employment, so they end up needing to know about all of those as well. So this is this place-based, really working with what's unique, what's strong, what's amazing about your place, and really marketing and selling that and being able to be an ambassador for that. Everyone should be able to be an ambassador for the places we live in and why we like to live there, because those stories really resonate with people. And then this community driven, it's to get a good place-based part, as I spoke about earlier, it also needs to be community driven or engaged at the very minimum. So very significant representation from the people experiencing the problem and the organizations that can help with those systemic problems. So you definitely would want council in there for some of those systemic problems. Also, if you're going to do attract resources, so being able to do a good position description and a good ad, you need to be able to sell your town. There should be really good resources that are available for every business and employer in the community to use, and gorgeous photos of all the amazing things of why you might want to live in Bundaberg or wherever. And I think all places have assets, and we just need to know what they are, and to be sure not to always focus on what your strengths are, not so much your weaknesses, but own your weaknesses as well. So, but generally you must start small and build those relationships, because what I've seen is that over time they strengthen, and the program builds momentum. So we just need to get our foundations right, which is good governance, which is based on relationships, and then how you might finance such a program. That all works on having trust and common goals. So I mean, as you know, Gail, we've been talking for a year now that establishing those things, I often say it can take a good 2 years to get those right, but I describe them like the foundations of the house, that once you bolt on the community connector program, you really need those things to be very stable and have been thought about, because the programs usually gather momentum fairly quickly. It's a bit like people go, oh, I never knew there was such a need. So I think an example that Shepparton's been running since 2021, and that's all professionals and skilled workers. And they've settled over 600 workers and their families since that time. So really large numbers of settlement. So transformational for Shepparton, as it is for any communities to do it. The scale depends, the numbers depend on how big those communities are. So.
And I know, like for us, for Welcome to Bundaberg, we kind of started out with the resources and creating that, wanting to help settle those newly arrived people with some type of physical resource, which was where we came up with the welcome bags and then the magazine that goes inside the bag, which really helps them on that road to relocating and connecting them with those certain organisations that the housing, the employment, partner employment, healthcare, and education. They're kind of the big things like you've mentioned, and then progressing that into more of a tailored service to really wanting to make sure that these people, when we spend so much time, effort and money getting them here, making sure that we hold on to them and that they want to stay. So really, I guess, embodying the principles of the research, which is, that connection and belonging and for that long-term support to nurture that, nurture those people and really hold on to them. So it's a really great program. It's an amazing piece of work, and the research is and the evidence is very clear in why it's working, and we're at that stage now where we're looking for people to hop on the train, to form a steering group to really look at Bundaberg as a site that will, for it to be a place space, getting those important key stakeholders involved in the process and tailoring it around our specific needs, because you would see every site's different. Every town has those little quirky things that suit their position in them. And I guess in terms of East Coast Queensland, where we're competing against lots of beautiful places. It's not enough for us just to say that come to Bundaberg, we're a beautiful place to live. The climate's wonderful. We really need to be inclusive and have that real welcoming culture.
Yeah, and I've come to believe that every community needs, every rural and regional community needs this program. It is a missing piece in the workforce strengthening strategies that we have. And I think I often speak that we've had a lot of money focused on education and training in place, and those strategies are important to make sure that we build a pipeline of workers. But we will always, as I started, need to attract skilled workers. And it's such an effort to attract them, and it's costly, and it's exhausting. That's pretty much universal what I hear from employers, that you want to absolutely do everything you can to be able to settle that family or individual in well, and then do all the things you need to do in terms of professional support and these systemic issues that in the community, housing, schooling, etc. Put those in place to make sure that you are retaining this workforce. You won't necessarily retain them forever, but usually if you're, particularly if you're looking for in the sort of mid-career and seniors, if they're in midlife, they're likely to stay a good while, because that group, because of what's happening for them in their families, they don't tend to move around a lot. As we all know, you don't tend to do that. It's not the most common thing, so hard to attract. But with the right steps in place, you'll very likely retain them, and they'll also become great advocates for moving to Bundaberg and all the things that are fabulous about moving to Bundaberg. And they become great testimonials and all the things. But I mean, I talked about values, I think I used to sort of say, if I had to summarize my whole PhD, it was the importance of being nice. And that we need to be warm, welcoming individuals to everyone, to see people, to see and invite people that we don't know and welcome them in, and make sure that any clubs and groups we're involved in, that there's a real strategy for welcoming newcomers. I'm the president and of our community garden, and we have a whole strategy around welcoming people who visit the garden and want to volunteer. And we need to be doing that. These people need to be seen, and all of us, whatever role we play in our community, need to be doing the things to help support, good referrals to a hairdresser and a vet and all the things are really, there's a long list. So I think the interesting thing is all the programs are kind of doing the same thing. The Community Connector program settles and connects people and make sure settlement is good, and then social connection is built on. But they all look really different, how they're governed and managed and what their ultimate aims are. So, some might be about allied health workforce, some about, as I said, Southern Grampians was about nursing and allied health. Others, generally, I would say healthcare is often a really good place to start, because it resonates broadly in the community about what happens when those things are not in place. And I think that's when I was talking about Glen, there were many stories that I heard around the impact of not having enough medical workforce, both at the GP level and those GPs practicing at the local hospital. And some of the impacts of that were deaths, probably avoidable deaths. And since that time, New South Wales did an inquiry about those types of things. So workforce is absolutely essential. Medical workforce is one of those ones you're always going to need to attract, because it's a long pathway, and they're nearly always in middle careers. So that always makes them extra challenging to attract. But I believe every community is wonderful and unique, and can attract and retain workforce. I have an unbelievable faith in rural communities and what amazing places they are to live. So we all need to be seeing from that song sheet. And I think in the last 10 years, some of the heartening things, where this used to be, I think to talk about, Gail, you talked about, you kind of knew it. I think when I spoke to managers, that's what they say about my peer-reviewed papers, that I'm kind of stating the things they've always instinctively known, but it's so nice to know there's an evidence base around it to go, actually, you're spot on. These are the things that really matter. And so it's interesting to see, 10 years later, these person-centered approaches, settlement, community connector programs, all being put into job ads as routine. We do these things routinely. And people, organizations are knowing that if they want to recruit the best, that they need to be doing all these things, or, another town will get them that's doing these things. So I see community connector programs seen as one of the benefits of working here, that we will set you up with that. It's a free service. It will look after, often it's about partners, that they're concerned about their partner, and they can immediately be set up and connected to speak to the community connector well before they're actually arriving. Even people who are just sort of exploring the options, the community connectors are there to have those conversations and really be ambassadors for their particular community.
It's such an important role, and we're well on our way to having this rolling out in Bundaberg, and we're excited to get to the next stages of where that's going, and really create some long-lasting impact. Because, like you said, when there's shortages in certain areas, that has such ripple effects across so many different areas of our region. And we see it and we come across it every single day. So I think, knowing that this is rolled out and been running and working in other communities that are very similar to ours is evidence that there's nothing stopping us bringing it and giving it a hot crack,
Hot crack, yeah.
as we say in Bundaberg.
And I really, speak to your rural leaders, key people in council, big business, your healthcare service. It's really important to put your hand up and say, we support this, and then to get involved. That governance, your programs are as good as the governance behind them, and there's some planning work to be done. The easy part is once the community connectors sort of recruited, it gets a little bit easier then, but and there's a whole, as you know, there's a network that we have to support community connectors to stay evidence informed, and strategies and all sorts of management tools to make their jobs easier. But this fundamental establishment phase that you're in needs work, and it needs early adopters, as I call them, the people that have always been a bit courageous. You're looking for the courageous ones who will go, yep, let's give it a crack. And I think, 4 or 5 years ago, they really were, the cowboys out there, because there was no, we thought this would work in Australia, but there was no evidence yet to say this would work in Australia. So all kudos to Glen for being really brave to go, yep, we'll do this. And they've recently been awarded a very significant contract from the New South Wales government to really expand in more welcoming and supporting of essential workers. So that's what can happen if you get things started and come together. I have amazing belief in the power of collaboration, and some good people coming together will make an amazing difference. So and you've got to start somewhere. So I would go start with skilled worker shortages. They're the immediate ones. They're usually the ones that are really making it difficult for employers to turn up and join these groups. But it's important that those things are done with first. There are other things, grow your own workforce. They're all important strategies, but they're really supported best by having a skilled workforce that's full, to be able to provide that mentoring and support locally. You can't be what you can't see, and so and as I said, I think we've focused an enormous amount of research and finances on the education path, important, but the attraction and retention component is as equally important. What happens after education? What are the choices people make? And people are complex. That's be nice, and people are complex. So there is no the support that we give an individual is never kind of exactly. I don't think I've ever heard of ones that are exactly the same. They've all got different circumstances, different life stage, different career stages, different family combinations. And so we need to really provide good support based on those things. And the community connectors are all trained in that life stage, career stage, and I call it degree of familiarity with rural living. So as I said, those 3 times more work for internationals is because also they don't have much cultural experience of rural Australia and need support with how things operate, both in Australia and in your particular rural town. So and we have many levels of government, which makes it extra confusing for people. Which level of government are we talking about? So you're easiest to recruit are from other regional places, but everybody's competing for them too. So yeah, you need to do all the things, as I say, and no one thing, but start where you've got momentum. Start where you're likely to have some easy, quick wins, and that people, and then sell those success stories both to your community and business, so community, so that they know about the program, but businesses, particularly employers, need to use the service. That's essential for it to survive. So, and eventually, I encourage. You can have some grant funding initially, but in the end, most of these programs end up being fee for service. So we need employers to see the impact. So we've got some survey tools that we're about to release to support employers through the Community Connector to know what's happening for their employees around job and personal satisfaction. And what's the likelihood of turnover intention. So that's all important data to know that are you doing the things that need to be done to keep staff. And there's always unavoidable turnover, as I call it. You can do all the right things, and for personal reasons, you can't stop that turnover. So, and that will always happen. But the stronger the relationship is with the line manager, and the more they know about that person, and the more notice they can get. So there's something that I'm listening to at the moment with a client who has a very senior allied health manager. Children are heading into high school age. They want to make a move from remote to the coast. There was nothing stopping that. No amount of good offers, incentives, or anything will change that. And I think we know that. We know it is just people going through our lives. There are key things in our life that are really important decisions that we make, and we're usually making them for the good of the whole family, not just us as workers. So I think somehow along the line we got really siloed and looking just at professional and job satisfaction, and it's much more complex than that. We need to be thinking with that more sort of systems thinking approach, both at the individual level and at the community level. And out of that can be magic and really remarkable results.
So much information and such value in the words that you speak of and the body of work that you've done. Thank you for joining us today. It's been a really good conversation. I've really enjoyed hearing the stories and learning, all the facets and all the stuff, like you said, that we need to do and where we're at and where we can get to and the impact that we can create. And I'm excited to move on to the next phases of what we're doing here in Bundaberg. And thank you for joining us and sharing all your wisdom.
Right. Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed talking to you and enjoying helping Bundaberg establish its own Community Connector program.
Tell everyone where they can connect with you, how they can reach out to you if they want to know more, if they're listening outside of Bundaberg or from wherever they might want to.
So
connect.
I have a website called Attract Connect Stay, just Attract Connect Stay, and that has lots of training and resources and a checklist. I really encourage you to, if you're an organisation, where are you sitting in the Attract Connect Stay frameworks solution? Where do you need to focus? What might be the things you need? So that's great to jump on and do that. And if you want to hear about all the sites and what's happening in this space, the best thing to do is follow Dr. Cath Cosgrave, Cosgrave, on LinkedIn. And then you can see all what's happening with that I'm doing, that other members of the team and our sites are doing. So we often are reposting Gail's work and what's happening in Bundaberg. So that's a really, that shows you all the things that are happening in this space. So there's a lot. And I hope there will be more and more as time goes on.
Yes, cool. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for sticking around to the end of this episode. If you would like to listen to future episodes, you can follow or subscribe to Welcome to Bundaberg on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and on our socials, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok @Welcome to Bundaberg.